public hearing into the Titan Submersible disaster has revealed the final text messages sent by those on board as they headed towards the wreck of the Titanic. One read, "All good here," before the craft imploded and killed all the people on board.
It's been 2 years since the Titan Submersible Implosion, but what if we told you that there's more to what happened than what you were told? 5 men were killed that day because of extreme pressure levels, but it was more than that, much more than that. This is what really happened in 2023 with the almighty Titan Submersible. How it all began. On the 18th of June, 2023, a tragic event like none other was recorded in the North Atlantic Ocean near Newfoundland, Canada. Titan, as it was called, was a submersible operated by OceanGate, an American company known for going on various kinds of deep-sea expeditions. This one in particular, however, was different, for reasons that are not so great. This sub was on a mission to explore the wreck of the Titanic. This expedition, like others before it, was supposed to be a once-in-a-lifetime experience for those aboard. Unfortunately, the submersible imploded during the dive, and it led to the heartbreaking loss of all 5 people on board. Among the victims were 4 adult men and a young boy. It's been almost 2 years, but their families have not recovered from the loss they never saw coming. But let's go back where and how this all started, and you'll be surprised how this ends. OceanGate was a private company that started in 2009, and it was founded by 2 brilliant men, Stockton Rush and Guillermo Söhnlein. They really just had a knack for making deep-sea explorations more accessible to people who had the interest and the budget for such adventures. In a 2019 interview with Smithsonian Magazine, Rush summed up the allure of such expeditions. In his words, "There's only one wreck that everyone knows. If you ask people to name something underwater, it's going to be sharks, whales, Titanic." And from 2010 until the tragic incident with the Titan Submersible in 2023, Rush loved what he did. OceanGate actually offered trips for paying customers using commercial submersibles. These expeditions took place in places like the waters off California, the Gulf of Mexico, and even the Atlantic Ocean. It was simply a company that offered a chance for people to see parts of the ocean most would never dream of visiting. However, Stockton Rush began to see things quite differently. He realized later on that exploring shipwrecks could be way more than just an adventure for him and his customers. It could become a great way to get media attention. And so what did he do? He set out to plan the most historic dive ever, and it was indeed historic. The voyage to explore the wreck of the Titanic began to take bookings in early 2023. Rush personally reached out to Jay Bloom, an American businessman, and offered him and his son 2 seats on the excursion at a significantly discounted rate. Instead of the full price of $250,000 per person, Rush offered the tickets for $150,000 each, probably as a way to encourage their participation. During the offer, Rush reportedly assured Bloom that the journey was completely safe, even going so far as to say it was safer than crossing the street. Despite the discount rate and Rush's assurances, Bloom decided to pass on the opportunity. He had serious concerns about the safety of the trip, which he simply couldn't overlook. The excursion, originally scheduled for May, was later postponed to June due to unfavorable weather conditions. This delay actually gave Bloom and his son even more time to consider their decision to join in the dive, one that in hindsight saved their lives. On the 16th of June 2023, at precisely 9:31 a.m., the much-anticipated expedition to explore the wreck of the Titanic, also known as Mission 5, officially set off. Rush was in high spirits, excited about what he was about to see. The voyage began from St. John's, Newfoundland, with the crew and passengers boarding the Canadian-flagged research and mother vessel, Polar Prince. Among the passengers who agreed to show up was Hamish Harding, a British billionaire and adventurer who shared his excitement on Facebook before the journey. In his post, he mentioned that due to the worst winter in Newfoundland in 40 years, the mission is likely to be the first and only crewed mission to the Titanic in 2023. In his words, "A weather window has just opened up, and we are going to attempt to dive tomorrow." Harding also mentioned that the operation was set to begin really early the next morning, at around 4 a.m. If only he knew what would go down that morning. The ship, MV Polar Prince, indeed reached the vicinity of the Titanic wreck site early on the 18th of June 2023, arriving at approximately 5:15 a.m. By 8:30 a.m., 5 individuals, that is, the full crew for this expedition, were carefully loaded into the Titan Submersible. The vessel was positioned on top of a specialized floating platform known as the Launch and Recovery System, designed to assist with the descent and retrieval process. Once all the occupants were safely on board, the forward dome of the Titan was securely fastened, and they were almost ready to go. This dive was officially described by OceanGate as Dive 88, for whatever reason that only the founders knew. At 8:55 a.m., the floating platform was vented and it sank just below the water's surface, enabling the Titan to prepare for its descent. By the time it was 9:18 a.m., the Titan had successfully disengaged from the launch platform. And so, it began, one of the most devastating tragedies the world has ever known. For the first hour and a half of the descent, everything seemed to be going smoothly. The Titan communicated regularly with the Polar Prince, and they were sending updates via text every 15 minutes. In addition to these updates, the submersible continued to receive a data signal, also called a ping, every 5 to 10 seconds, just to make sure that the connection was intact. At a depth of 2,274 meters, the submersible sent a reassuring message saying, "All good here." The usual pings continued to come through on the communications channel, and it appeared that everything was functioning normally. There were no signs of any issues, and the descent appeared to be going exactly as planned. Then suddenly, at 10:47 a.m., at an approximate depth of 3,341 meters, the Titan sent a brief but somewhat disturbing text, dropped 2 watts, which likely referring to the release of weight, a procedure used to control buoyancy during deep dives. This was the last message received before communication ceased. Just a few seconds later, at 10:47 a.m., the final ping from the Titan was received, and that was the end of all communication. At this point, there was no further word from the submersible, and the Polar Prince and its crew were just there, awaiting further signals. Suspicions began to rise, and the US Navy Acoustic Detection System, which is specifically designed to detect the sounds of military submarines, picked up an unusual acoustic signal just hours after the Titan had submerged. This signal was consistent with what experts would later describe as the sound of an implosion, something that happens when a submersible experiences pressure failure at extreme depths. The Titan was originally expected to resurface at 4:30 p.m., and everything seemed to be on track for the dive. However, when 7:10 p.m. rolled around and there was still no sign of the submersible, they just knew something had gone terribly wrong. The search. The US Coast Guard was immediately notified that the vessel was missing, and in only minutes, an official search began. Meanwhile, the Navy took a closer look at its acoustic data from the time of the dive and detected that something may have indeed gone wrong somewhere. This information was quickly passed along to the Coast Guard, but they still did not want to jump to conclusions. Perhaps they were just out of communicative reach. Besides, they understood that when the Titan set out on its mission, it was equipped with enough breathable air for its 5 passengers to last up to 96 hours. This meant that even if they were indeed missing, the passengers would have had air to survive for several days, and the search teams would have a window of time to locate and rescue them. Unfortunately, they soon realized that this window was never open. The United States Coast Guard, United States Navy, and Canadian Coast Guard were at the forefront of the operation and began to pool all their resources and expertise to make sure that they were found. Aircraft from both the Royal Canadian Air Force and the United States Air National Guard took to the skies and were scanning the area for any sign of the submersible. Meanwhile, a Royal Canadian Navy ship was also deployed to provide additional support on the water. In addition to these military efforts, several commercial and research ships were called in to help search the vast expanse of the ocean. These ships were operated with advanced technologies, including remotely operated underwater vehicles, which were used for searching the deep, dark waters where the Titan would most likely be lost in. On the surface, boats and ships carefully combed through the area, looking for any signs of debris or floating wreckage. Beneath the water, sonar technology was used to map the sea floor and search for the submersible at depths, where it could have descended. Every possible method was employed to locate the Titan as quickly as possible. But it was late, far too late. Unfortunately, bad weather made things even more difficult. It was quite hard to see anything, and so it prevented crews from being able to do their job as effectively as they wanted. But luckily, by the next day, the weather cleared up a bit, and it became a little easier for everyone involved to continue the search. However, the sea conditions were still less than ideal, and the cold water temperatures didn't help at all. Just then, it struck them that they had found the fastest route to the missing ship and passengers. Normally, many submersibles are equipped with acoustic beacons. These are special devices that could be detected by rescuers to help pinpoint their location underwater. However, they soon found out that this route they had found was a dead end. The Titan didn't have this device. At 1:18 p.m. on the 22nd of June, the US Coast Guard's northeast sector officially announced that they had discovered a debris field near the wreck of the Titanic. Later, in early October, engineers were also able to recover additional pieces of debris from the ocean floor, as well as what they thought to be human remains. They couldn't exactly tell because of the impact of the implosion. It had completely crushed all 5 passengers to bones. Simulations that were developed in 2023 even show that the implosion of the submersible likely occurred in less than 1 second. More precise estimates say it happened in just a matter of tens of milliseconds. This is incredibly fast, so fast that it happens quicker than the brain can process information. And because the implosion took place at such a crazy speed, there was essentially no time for the passengers aboard the vessel to experience the full force of the hull collapsing. It all happened so fast that the victims would not have felt any pain because their bodies disintegrated in the blink of an eye. The whole disaster was over before they could even register what was happening. And so the remains, along with other evidence, were sent for identification, and at the end of the day, the Armed Forces DNA Identification Laboratory attempted to process and analyze the samples. After thorough testing, the results came out, and it was 100% clear. The DNA of the 5 men were found all over the remains of the ship. However, when the investigation commenced, they found out that Rush did have quite a few skeletons in his cupboard. Rush had many issues. Investigations into the tragic crash went on for months, and part of the focus was on understanding what might have contributed to the disaster. Image David Lockridge, a former operations director at OceanGate, appeared to give his testimony based on his experience with the company, and it was quite disturbing. Back in 2016, OceanGate was conducting a dive with another of its submersibles, the Cyclops 1, to explore the remains of the Andrea Doria ocean liner. The Andrea Doria was an Italian passenger liner that tragically sank in the Atlantic Ocean on the night of July 25 to 26, 1956, after colliding with the Swedish ship Stockholm off the coast of Nantucket, Massachusetts. At the time, the Andrea Doria was actually considered one of Italy's most impressive ships. It was the largest, fastest, and believed to be the safest liner in the Italian fleet. Out of the 1,706 passengers and crew aboard, 1,660 were rescued and survived the ordeal. This was thanks to the efforts of nearby ships and rescue operations that sprang into action. However, 46 people on the Andrea Doria lost their lives due to the collision. On the Stockholm, which also sustained heavy damage, 5 crew members died during the incident. Now, Lockridge explained that OceanGate had organized an expedition to go visit the wreck site, and as the most experienced pilot on the team, at the time, he expected to take control of the submersible for that mission. However, Stockton Rush, the CEO and co-founder of OceanGate, insisted that he would pilot it instead. Lockridge revealed in his testimony that he had objected to Rush taking control because he felt that sometimes Rush made decisions based on his own preferences, rather than what might be best for the situation. Apparently, Rush responded by immediately asserting his authority as the head of the company. In Lockridge's own words, Rush told him, "Just remember, I'm the CEO, you're just an employee." Despite his objections and concerns, Lockridge still wanted to go on the dive and persuaded Rush to let him join the mission as part of the crew. Alongside Lockridge, 3 paying passengers were also aboard the Cyclops for the dive. But trouble started almost immediately. Lockridge recalled that as Rush sat at the helm, he was seriously struggling to initiate the dive properly. The submersible seemed unresponsive, and Rush was having a hard time figuring out how to get it to work. Lockridge said he tried to help, but Rush wasn't listening to him or anyone else. As a matter of fact, he didn't even follow standard safety practices before their dive. As is standard procedure for any experienced submersible pilot, they were supposed to pause and carefully assess their surroundings before proceeding further, especially because it was quite difficult to see anything down there. However, according to Lockridge, Rush was resistant to this advice and continued to argue with him inside the submersible. Lockridge described how each time he tried to take control of the situation by reaching for the controller, Rush would push it further and further away from him to keep it out of his reach. Lockridge also noted that during the dive, he would assess the situation outside the submersible, but Rush remained in the back seat and never once got up to evaluate the situation himself. As they continued descending into the depths, David Lockridge felt it was necessary to again remind Stockton Rush about the safety procedures for this level of depth. They were supposed to keep a safe distance from the wreckage because getting too close could be dangerous for both the submersible and everyone on board. However, when Lockridge brought this up, Rush didn't take it well. Instead of listening, he brushed off the warning and told Lockridge not to tell him what to do. Rush did what he knew to do best and went ahead in a rush, and it wasn't long before things took a turn for the worse. He ended up smashing the submersible down onto the seafloor. The impact stirred a cloud of sediment, making it almost impossible to see anything. At that point, it was clear they were right on top of the wreck, exactly the situation they were trying to avoid. At this point, everyone in the submersible began to panic. One of the paying passengers, clearly terrified and frustrated, finally lost her composure. According to Lockridge, she started screaming and swearing at Rush, demanding that he hand over the controller. According to Lockridge, when the situation inside the sub reached its breaking point, Rush finally decided to hand over the controller, but in a way that was far from professional. Instead of calmly passing the controller, Rush threw it at Lockridge. The controller struck Lockridge on the right side of his head before hitting the ground. To make matters worse, one of the buttons on the device broke off when it landed. Despite all of the chaos, Lockridge didn't let the moment bother him. He quickly picked up the controller, fixed the broken button, and immediately took charge of the submersible. Within 15 minutes, he had successfully navigated them out of the potentially dangerous situation and brought them back to safety. Surprisingly, however, Rush seemed apologetic afterward. He acknowledged his earlier attitude and appeared to regret how things had unfolded during the dive. When they surfaced, Lockridge said, "The other passengers were obviously relieved and grateful. They even celebrated him for stepping in and taking control when things were about to go south." However, some things changed. Lockridge said that his relationship with Rush never recovered after that incident. Something had just shifted between them. At some point, Rush even stopped speaking to him. By 2018, David Lockridge was fired from OceanGate after a fallout over the company's approach to diving, particularly their development of the Titan sub. Lockridge had serious concerns about the safety of the sub and the company's methods, and he wasn't shy about voicing them. Unfortunately, those concerns led to a disagreement with the leadership at OceanGate, and eventually he was let go. Afterward, the two sides ended up in legal battles, with both filing lawsuits against each other. But eventually those were settled, and the matter was put to rest. Still, Lockridge has said that deep down, he always knew something was going to go wrong at OceanGate. He just didn't know exactly when it would happen. After his testimony, investigators continued to ask witnesses about any previous issues with past dives, especially the one that took place just before the Titan's final tragic voyage. They were still trying to piece together the bigger picture of what might have gone wrong, looking for any warning signs or recurring problems that could have led to the disaster. And they found one. Dr. Stephen Ross, who was OceanGate's former scientific director, was another witness to testify during the proceedings. He spoke about everything that had happened during the second-to-last expedition to the Titanic wreck site. According to Dr. Ross, this dive had to be aborted due to a malfunction with the platform that the submersible Titan was on. The malfunction caused a series of issues that ultimately led to the pilot crashing into the rear bulkhead of the submersible. This caused a chaotic situation for the passengers inside, with one of them even ending up upside down in the cramped space. Thankfully, no one was injured during the incident, and the dive was ultimately called off and aborted. However, it was clear to everyone involved that there were a number of serious issues that the surface team had to handle and address. Renata Rojas, a banker who had previously gone on a dive to the Titanic wreck aboard the experimental submersible, was on the surface crew during the 2023 expedition. She wasn't diving this time, she was only volunteering to help out. During her testimony, Rojas was understandably emotional as she began to recount what happened on the 18th of June, 2023. The weight of the situation hit her hard, and after a few moments, the hearing took a 10-minute break to give her time to collect herself before continuing. Investigators then took the opportunity to ask her about the dive that took place just before their own expedition to the Titanic wreck site. According to Rojas, who was present on the ship during that particular dive, something happened as the Titan Submersible was coming back to the surface. They reported a loud bang immediately drew attention and caused concern. Ross, who was also present, made his contributions and explained that he was told the noise likely resulted from the shifting of the pressure hull within its steel or metal cradle. The shifting hull, when it popped back into place, could have caused the loud bang that was heard. But despite the potentially dangerous reasons for the noise that they heard, Ross went on to mention that, as far as he knew, there was no visual inspection of the interior of the hull after the incident. The CEO, Rush, never made an attempt to find out exactly what went wrong with the aborted dive that day. But that's not all. What one man told investigators next changed everything. There were too many warnings. A man named William Conan, who is the chair of the Manned Underwater Vehicles Committee at the Marine Technology Society, explained that industry regulations are pretty strong overall. However, OceanGate expeditions managed to boycott them by operating out in international waters, where those rules don't really apply. In fact, Conan's company, Hydrospace, had actually designed a window that OceanGate requested for the Titan. However, they made it very clear at the time that the window couldn't be used for deep-sea diving unless it went through serious and thorough testing. In fact, back in 2018, a formal letter was sent directly to Stockton Rush after his recklessness had been put on display many times. The letter wasn't just from one person, it was signed by several industry experts, including William Conan, who voiced their concerns about safety and other issues regarding the submersible's design and operation. In the letter, they warned that OceanGate's experimental approach to practically everything, along with their choice not to have a top agency inspect the Titan, could lead to serious, or as they described it, catastrophic problems. They also made it clear that they shared unanimous concern about how the Titan was developed. On top of that, former passengers who had been on the Titan described some alarming issues, like losing communication multiple times during trips. One CBS journalist who had the opportunity to go on the submersible in 2022 shared a rather surprising detail about the experience. Before they could even board, they were required to sign a detailed waiver. This waiver specifically stated that the Titan was considered an experimental vessel, and perhaps most concerning, that it had not been approved or certified by any regulatory body. Before the accident, Stockton Rush often spoke out against what he saw as overly strict safety regulations in the industry. In a 2021 interview, he even admitted to breaking some rules when he was building the Titan. He mentioned the company's decision to use a combination of carbon fiber and titanium for the sub's hull, even though the industry typically sticks to tested materials like solid steel or pure titanium for deep-sea vessels. And after reading the letter from concerned experts, Rush actually called William Conan to talk about it. During that conversation, Rush insisted that the industry's safety standards were doing nothing but holding back innovation and making it harder to push boundaries. Just a few years after that, we see that he's done much more than push boundaries. He succeeded in taking his own life and others along with him. At the end of the day, the 5 lives that were lost that day, including his, boils down to just one thing. If only Stockton Rush had listened. If you found this dive into the Titan sub-disaster insightful, don't forget to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're interested in more stories that uncover the details behind major events, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss out. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.